I know Tim personally and listened to the dialogue and saw it written honestly. I wasn't outraged as anybody else. I understand how it can be taken under context or certain contexts and be offensive to some. But if you're saying, hey, this is a brown ball, they're wearing dark colors, and he has a brown arm, honestly, we were having trouble seeing the ball on the field. He's making a play fake, and sometimes he swings his arm really fast. And you're like, okay, does he have the ball on this play? And then you look up and Ingram is running it. Technically, it was a valid point, but you can always phrase things better and not say his black skin, quote. But I've had a relationship with him since I got here, and he's never been anything but a great guy and a professional, and a guy who takes his job seriously.
There is the part that you know about Tim Ryan on a personal level, and you say, okay, he meant no harm, he meant no malice, he made a mistake, et cetera, because you could explain things differently. This is not some racially insensitive or racist dude, and he should not be castigated or characterized that way. But in general, the fact that you felt the need to bring up the black skin is something that's alarming to a lot of black people. Why? Because as both Max and I have articulated throughout our years together on this show, when we're lamenting the state of affairs that exist in this country as it pertains to things racially insensitive, racism, or our history of racism and things of that nature in this country, usually when people allude to such things as skin color, it's used basically as a tool to minimize the greatness and the intellect of the people that you're talking about. So in other words, Lamar Jackson runs with the football and he's got dark skin and you're carrying this football and it's difficult for you to see. Somehow, some way, in a lot of people's eyes, that's basically code for saying it's really not about his intellect or his talent. You know, his pigmentation in a roundabout way is giving him some kind of unfair advantage or whatever. Because at the end of the day, there are plenty of black dudes who, dare I say, were darker in their hue and pigmentation than Lamar Jackson.
Right.
I've never heard that analogy before. I've seen a whole bunch of black people carrying the football or every Sunday. I never heard that from somebody announcing on the game. And I think that's the kind of thing that you have to look at and say, where did that come from? Not to castigate, not to excoriate him, but you do have to sit up there and highlight it to point out, listen, you don't have to go there to make that point. I think in a roundabout way, that's what Richard Sherman was saying, but I think it needs to be said.
I think Richard Sherman's comments are very interesting and important, and he has the capacity to articulate them finely and also the courage to say it out loud.
Yes, he does.
And see, what it makes me think of is it's verboten, it's forbidden, socially sanctioned against, to even assess the point that was made, because race is the third rail in American culture. So
for folks other than black people.
For sure,
yes.
Right. But if a white person makes that point,
correct,
right. And so once that point is made, you can either mock it publicly or you can castigate the person who made the point. Those are the only two things you're allowed to do. If you're white in the media, for example, like we were talking about it, it seemed a silly, but Richard Sherman, I didn't play football, you didn't play football. Richard Sherman says, look, he said mesh point is in terms of ball fakes and handoffs and stuff, that's a significant issue. If your point is it's a brown ball, a dark uniform, and a brown arm, and so it makes the mesh point difficult, yeah, that's true. He said, oh, wow, that is true. So maybe the point shouldn't be mocked, and the person who articulates it, even if they're white, not castigated. Or maybe Dominique Foxworth would come on here and say, but wait a minute, why does race become a focus when we've never said maybe it's easier for a white pitcher whose fingers mesh with the ball better? Maybe, who knows? Maybe it's more difficult for an African-American pitcher for that reason. I don't know, but the point is it's not brought up. Now it's brought up. I would counter that by saying, he brought it up for 10 seconds. It was like just one of the many, many points he made. And the media goes, oh, we have a story. We have, grist for the mill. Let's talk about it. And what I was concerned about yesterday, even with the suspension, let alone talk about him losing his job, is you don't want to create a climate A racially sensitive climate is important. People react to PC culture and they think it goes overboard, and I understand that too. When it creates a climate of fear that chills speech and public discourse because we're all the poorer for it. Mm-hmm. It's fine to be sensitive to marginalized people, and even maybe people feel overly sensitive to the things they've been through. That's fine, but where it gets dangerous is when there's a chilling effect on public discourse. And I felt here the reaction to it, even with the suspension, may have crossed that line.
Fine, and I don't disagree with you. What I would say to you, however, is this, and I'll just close out my point by saying this. I am a proponent of white people being able to have the freedom to speak on race from their perspective, just like black folks want the license to speak on that. If you're honest and forthcoming and sensitive to the people that you're communicating with about what has ailed them throughout American history and beyond, go ahead and talk. The flip side to it, however, is that there's too much coded behavior, coded language that has taken place throughout history. And so as a result, what the real problem is when you talk about the third rail is not trusting that someone is honest, forthcoming, and brave enough to touch on issues. And as a result, that's why you have so many people from disenfranchised communities throughout this country looking at somebody from a community that obviously has had an advantage and saying, we can't trust you to be truly honest about where you're coming from
point.
Because you don't want to be challenged.
The coded language is a great point. Or, and this is why Richard Sherman is better able to speak about this, not just because of his race, or not articulate enough, because you really have to thread that needle and be very specific about the points you make and be able to articulate them in a way that expresses there's no malice here. You know, and some people can do that. Richard Sherman is one of them, I think, whether he was white or black, and some people can't. Thanks for watching ESPN on YouTube. For more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app. And for live streaming sports and premium content, subscribe to ESPN+.